Chapter 4 of Transforming Darkness, a Shadow Work Toolkit for the Red-Pilled Initiate. Autonomous Complexes, Our Inner Demons. The shadow is a phenomenon caused by the psyche's need to protect the ego from our unconscious darkness. But there is a tightly related phenomenon, that of autonomous complexes, which are the byproduct of the splitting of the psyche due to trauma or difficulty in early life. To some degree, disturbances in childhood development that lead to chronic life difficulties or psychological disorders cannot be avoided. Nature doesn't provide the perfect opportunities for everyone to develop to their fullest potential from the get-go. Just as evil will always be with us as a form of social entropy, or just as microbial or viral pathogens will always be with us causing disease, psychic dysfunction cannot be fully eliminated. There will always be crazy people, and all of us will always be at least a little bit crazy. But there is a great deal of psychological disease which is completely avoidable if only our awareness were raised enough to see its origins. In fact, the symptoms of developmental trauma are so ubiquitous, so archetypally demonic, everyone can see them, but we just don't know what to make of it all. Here we will discuss in psychological terms what ancient people saw as demonic possession or soul loss at the individual level, which is becoming more and more prevalent in our current age. In Jung's system, the term complex refers to a number of situations which can get confusing. But at the most basic level, complexes are simply the organs of the psyche and are not pathological by nature. The ego is a complex, the persona is a complex, and we have parental complexes and many more. Everything that would constitute a major pattern in the psyche is technically a complex. Imagine how many government agencies and departments there are in a nation, plus corporations, nonprofits, and the like. Or imagine the inside of the body with its many organs, tissue, and networks. We might see the psyche as being structured similarly, with each department or organ as a complex doing its job. But when there is dysfunction or trauma in one's upbringing, our psychic patterning is fractured, and we can end up with pathologies that range from a small neurosis or phobia, also called a complex, to a highly destructive and habitual autonomous complex, or splinter psyche in Jung's words. Autonomous complexes drive addictions, self-destructive and compulsive behavior. They inject toxic thinking and feelings into consciousness. They cause hyperreactivity, pick fights with other people, or cause us to react to circumstances irrationally and uncontrollably. The huge current-day list of known psychological and personality disorders is not sourced in so many different causes, but represents the countless ways in which the psyche can split and give rise to inner dysfunction. Autonomous complexes take over our consciousness when they are active and force us to submit to their program. They are feeling-toned in Jung's words, which means that when they are fully activated, they drag us along with powerful emotional energy. When growing up, if we are emotionally or physically neglected or abused, or if we simply have a hard time integrating into our environment, especially in key moments of development, this causes inner dissociation or splitting. When this occurs, which is incredibly common in modern society, a useful psychic organ cannot come online properly, and a maladaptive variation will manifest instead. We might see this operation on a spectrum where relatively mild neuroses and anxieties are on one end, to addictions or chronic physical symptoms, compulsive acting out, criminal behavior, or even serial killing at the far end. Because complexes have an archetypal core, according to Jung, they can take on a mythic profile. In dreams, autonomous complexes may appear as negative characters or even demons. When they take us over, they incorporate themselves into our egos and become us. Jung and his predecessor Pierre Janet emphasized the dissociative or split up nature of the psyche, which they saw as an ecosystem of subpersonalities, hopefully in relative symbiosis with the ego and the unconscious. When these subdivisions are traumatized and become orphaned, they cause a wide range of disturbances, some of which are truly demonic. The red-pilled researcher knows very well that there is an entire ecosystem of split-off parasitic entities in the structure of civilization that they call the deep state or shadow government. This also applies to the personal and collective psyche exactly. Most of the time, shadow complexes are invisible, hiding behind our behavior and projections so that we believe that their thoughts and beliefs are our own. We think that we are acting independently when in fact we are being nudged and influenced by them. Although the most extreme operations of autonomous complexes serve as dramatic examples, such as in full-blown psychosis or schizophrenia, more often we experience subtle unconscious pushing and pulling, biasing of our thoughts and emotions, cognitive dissonance, memory suppression, and other modifications of our minds. Like false flag operations, when we are triggered into chronic, addictive, manic, or self-sabotaging behavior or lifestyles that we cannot control over long periods of time, we are being directed by an autonomous complex. Although we may think at first that we are only triggered by specific conditions on occasion, when we consider our personal history, we will see that a complex with a long life cycle is involved. Much of what psychologically troubles people and why they seek therapy or healing in the first place is often the symptoms of these shadow complexes manifesting in their lives. And when we realize that we are all connected through the culture mind, we can see that these complexes are part of the ecosystem of human consciousness that spans across the entire population, hidden in the collective shadow. These shadow complexes are genetically heritable. For example, a complex formed by childhood sexual abuse will influence the victim to abuse their own children, who will in turn abuse other children themselves. Additionally, their behavior and language in the world will act as a trigger for other sexual victims/predators who are themselves taken over by such complexes, and entire subcultures of pedophilic predators and victims become established. Then a child-abusing political ideology will develop on top of this, running the individuals who are themselves dissociated, semi-conscious victims of this shadow scripting of the culture mind, all created by psychic splitting from abuse. Now think of all the other types of shadow complexes that can form from abuse or neglect, get inherited, pass through the culture mind, and develop into psychosocial malware that inspires destructive political movements and fractures society. Every destructive ideology or ism is such an operation, parasitically living on people more or less traumatized under the spell of a psychosocial shadow complex that can only thrive on hurt and internally fractured people. Onlookers see these movements as cults and the followers as possessed. They are not wrong. Jung's words on autonomous complexes. Now let's look at some of Jung's actual words regarding this matter. And the following quotes are taken from a 1934 paper by Carl Jung called A Review of the Complex Theory. Let us turn first to the question of the psyche's tendency to split. The tendency to split means that parts of the psyche detach themselves from consciousness to such an extent that they not only appear foreign, but lead to an autonomous life of their own. It need not be a question of hysterical multiple personality or schizophrenic alterations of personality, but merely of so-called complexes that come entirely within the scope of the normal. Complexes interfere with the intentions of the will and disturb the conscious performance. They produce disturbances of memory and blockages in the flow of associations. They appear and disappear according to their own laws. They can temporarily obsess consciousness or influence speech and action in an unconscious way. Everyone knows nowadays that people have complexes. What is not so well known, though far more important theoretically, is that complexes can have us. An active complex puts us momentarily under a state of duress, of compulsive thinking and acting, for which under certain conditions, the only appropriate term would be the judicial concept of diminished responsibility. The complex has a powerful inner coherence. It has its own wholeness and, in addition, a relatively high degree of autonomy, so that it is subject to the control of the conscious mind to only a limited extent, and therefore behaves like an animated foreign body in the sphere of consciousness. The complex can usually be suppressed with an effort of will, but not argued out of existence, and at the first suitable opportunity, it reappears in all its original strength. Certain experimental investigations seem to indicate that its intensity or activity curve has a wave-like character, with a wavelength of hours, days, or weeks. This very complicated question remains as yet unclarified. But even the soberest formulation of the phenomenology of complexes cannot get around the impressive fact of their autonomy, and the deeper one penetrates into their nature, I might almost say into their biology, the more clearly do they reveal their character as splinter psyches. We observe the same phenomenon in certain psychoses when the complexes get loud and appear as voices, having a thoroughly personal character. Today, we can take it as moderately certain that complexes are in fact splinter psyches. The etiology of their origin is frequently a so-called trauma, an emotional shock or some such thing that splits off a bit of the psyche. Certainly one of the commonest causes is a moral conflict, which ultimately derives from the apparent impossibility of affirming the whole of one's nature. In such cases, their powers of assimilation become especially pronounced. Since unconsciousness helps the complex to assimilate even the ego, the result being a momentary and unconscious alteration of personality known as identification with the complex. In the Middle Ages, it went by another name. It was called possession. There is, in fact, no difference in principle between a slip of the tongue caused by a complex and the wildest blasphemies. It is only a difference of degree. When someone is in the throes of a violent emotion, we exclaim, "What's gotten into him today? He's driven by the devil," or hag-ridden, etc. Casting about for a medical comparison, one could best compare them with infections or with malign tumors, both of which arise without the least assistance from the conscious mind. Consequently, we find unmistakable traces of them in all peoples and in all epochs. The oldest literary records bear witness to them. Thus, the Gilgamesh epic describes in masterly fashion the psychology of the power complex, and the book of Tobit in the Old Testament gives the history of an erotic complex together with its cure. Okay, that's the end of those quotes by Jung from the Review of Complex Theory. Although Jung's understanding of autonomous complexes described and quoted above is thorough enough, there are new perspectives that add more detail and color to the situation that we will now bring in. Eckhart Tolle's pain body. Eckhart Tolle, the German spiritual teacher, uses the term pain body to describe the same phenomenon that Jung described as autonomous complexes. I often use Tolle's term myself, which I find more flexible. It can be applied to an individual's personal deep state or to that of a nation or the entire human species. And the following quotes are from Tolle's second book, A New Earth. The pain body is a semi-autonomous energy form that lives within most human beings, an entity made up of emotion. It has its own primitive intelligence, not unlike a cunning animal, and its intelligence is directed primarily at survival. Like all life forms, it periodically needs to feed, to take in new energy, and the food it requires to replenish itself consists of energy that is compatible with its own, which is to say, energy that vibrates at a similar frequency. Any emotionally painful experience can be used as food for the pain body. That's why it thrives on negative thinking, as well as drama in relationships. The pain body is an addiction to unhappiness. It may be shocking when you realize for the first time that there is something within you that periodically seeks emotional negativity, seeks unhappiness. You need even more awareness to see it in yourself than to recognize it in another person. Once the unhappiness has taken you over, not only do you not want an end to it, but you want to make others just as miserable as you are in order to feed on their negative emotional reactions. In most people, the pain body has a dormant and an active stage. When it is dormant, you easily forget that you carry a heavy, dark cloud or a dormant volcano inside you, depending on the energy field of your particular pain body. How long it remains dormant varies from person to person. A few weeks is the most common, but it can be a few days or months. In rare cases, the pain body can lie in hibernation for years before it gets triggered by some event. The pain body awakens from its dormancy when it gets hungry, when it is time to replenish itself. Alternatively, it may get triggered by an event at any time. The pain body that is ready to feed can use the most insignificant event as a trigger, something somebody says or does, or even a thought. If you live alone or there is nobody around at the time, the pain body will feed on your thoughts. Suddenly, your thinking becomes deeply negative. You are most likely unaware that just prior to the influx of negative thinking, a wave of emotion invaded your mind, as a dark and heavy mood, as anxiety or fiery anger. All thought is energy, and the pain body is now feeding on the energy of your thoughts. But it cannot feed on any thought. You don't need to be particularly sensitive to notice that a positive thought has a totally different feeling tone than a negative one. It is the same energy, but it vibrates at a different frequency. A happy, positive thought is indigestible to the pain body. It can only feed on negative thoughts because only those thoughts are compatible with its own energy field. Sometimes people with such dense pain bodies become activists fighting for a cause. The cause may indeed be worthy, and they are sometimes successful at first in getting things done. However, the negative energy that flows into what they say and do, and their unconscious need for enemies and conflict, tend to generate increasing opposition to their cause. Usually, they also end up creating enemies within their own organization because wherever they go, they find reasons for feeling bad, and so their pain body continues to find exactly what it is looking for. The collective dimension of the pain body has different strands in it. Tribes, nations, races all have their own collective pain body, some heavier than others, and most members of that tribe, nation, or race have a share in it to a greater or lesser degree. Certain countries in which many acts of collective violence were suffered or perpetrated have a heavier collective pain body than others. It doesn't really matter what proportion of your pain body belongs to your nation or race and what proportion is personal. In either case, you can only go beyond it by taking responsibility for your inner state now. Even if blame seems to be more justified, as long as you blame others, you keep feeding the pain body with your thoughts and remain trapped in your ego. There is only one perpetrator of evil on the planet: human unconsciousness. That realization is true forgiveness. With forgiveness, your victim identity dissolves and your true power emerges, the power of presence. Instead of blaming the darkness, you bring in the light. The beginning of freedom from the pain body lies first of all in the realization that you have a pain body. Then, more important, in your ability to stay present enough, alert enough, to notice the pain body in yourself as a heavy influx of negative emotion when it becomes active. When it is recognized, it can no longer pretend to be you and live and renew itself through you. It is your conscious presence that breaks the identification with the pain body. When you don't identify with it, the pain body can no longer control your thinking, and so cannot renew itself anymore by feeding on your thoughts. The pain body in most cases does not dissolve immediately, but once you have severed the link between it and your thinking, the pain body begins to lose energy. Your thinking ceases to be clouded by emotion. Your present perceptions are no longer distorted by the past. The energy that was trapped in the pain body then changes into vibrational frequency and is transmuted into presence. In this way, the pain body becomes fuel for consciousness. This is why many of the wisest, most enlightened men and women on our planet once had a heavy pain body. And that's the end of those quotes from Eckhart Tolle, A New Earth, Awakening to Your Life's Purpose, chapters 5 and 6. Everything Jung developed about autonomous complexes is here in Tolle's pain body idea. Its emotional or feeling-toned roots, its cyclical or wave-like behavior, its formation due to trauma, and its autonomous, parasitic nature. The reader can now compare this description with their own life and decide to what degree this theory applies to themselves and others close to them. Paul Levy's Wetiko. Paul Levy is an incredibly insightful writer on the subject of human evil as a collective psycho-spiritual phenomenon. He uses the Native American term Wetiko to describe the collective pain body or ecosystem of shadow complexes we have been discussing here. His approach emphasizes its viral nature, which bridges the personal psyche with the collective psyche and culture. And the following quotes are from Paul Levy's website, awakeninthedream.com. This mind virus, which Native Americans have called Wetiko, covertly operates through the unconscious blind spots in the human psyche, rendering people oblivious to their own madness and compelling them to act against their own best interests. To the extent we are unconsciously possessed by the spirit of Wetiko, it is as if a psychic tapeworm or parasite has taken over our brain and tricked us, its host, into thinking we are feeding and empowering ourselves while we are actually nourishing the parasite. Wetiko is a virulent psychic pathogen that insinuates thought forms and beliefs into our mind, which, due to their misleading and false nature, when unconsciously accepted and acted upon, feed it and ultimately kill its host, us. Just as computer viruses or malware infect a computer and program it to self-destruct, mind viruses like Wetiko program the human biocomputer to think, believe, and behave in ways that can result in our individual and collective self-destruction. People so afflicted, like someone in the throes of an addiction or lost in a state of trauma, unwittingly create the very problem they are trying to resolve, clinging desperately to the very thing that is torturing and destroying them. Being a disease of the soul, we all potentially have Wetiko, as it pervades and informs the underlying field of consciousness. Any one of us at any moment can fall into our unconscious and unwittingly become an instrument for the evil of Wetiko to act itself out through us and incarnate in our world. If we see someone who seems to be taken over by Wetiko and we think that they have the disease and we don't. In seeing them as separate, we have fallen under the spell of the virus. Ultimately speaking, in the Wetiko disease, we are not being infected by a physical, objectively existing virus outside of ourselves, but rather the origin and genesis of the Wetiko psychosis is entirely within the human psyche. The fact that Wetiko is the expression of something inside of us means that the cure for Wetiko is likewise within us as well. Though not objectively existing, the Wetiko pathogen has a virtual reality that nevertheless can influence us in such a way that it can potentially destroy our species. The fact that something that only exists as a function of ourselves can destroy us is pointing at and introducing us to the incredibly vast, invisible, and yet mostly untapped creative power that is our inherent birthright. If not used consciously, however, this creative power turns destructive. Wetiko is non-local in that it is an inner disease of the soul that explicates itself through the canvas of the outside world. Not constrained by the conventional laws of third-dimensional space and time, Wetiko non-locally informs events in the world as well as our reactions to them so as to synchronistically express itself. Just like in a dream, events in the outer world are symbolically reflecting back to us a condition deep within the psyche of each one of us. If we don't understand that our current world crisis has its roots within and is an expression of the human psyche, we are doomed to unconsciously repeat and continually recreate endless suffering and destruction in more and more amplified form, as if we are having a recurring nightmare. And that's the end of our quotes from Paul Levy from his glossary of terms at his website, awakeninthedream.com. Qliphothic scripts of the collective unconscious. Kabbalists, who are Jewish mystics, created a map of the energies of human consciousness they call the Tree of Life. We could also see it as a map of psychological archetypes. The tree is composed of 10 network nodes, each called Sephirot, that represent a different psychic and astrological energy type that one learns to understand and explore in spiritual practice. But then the Kabbalists also have a shadow tree of life that they call the Qliphoth, or the Tree of Death. In the Qliphoth, each of the 10 Sephirot represent a specific demon on the map of consciousness. For every archetypal virtue, there is a demonic shadow version that can be expressed. It occurs to me that the archetypal patterns behind split-off shadow complexes may in fact be pushing on the human psyche from the collective unconscious, our genome, ready to manifest and even sending viral codes from the Tree of Death side of reality into the Tree of Life side of reality. Just as biological viruses are always there looking for an opportunity to adapt and evolve, the viral codes that convert our psychic organs into autonomous shadow complexes are always there, always looking for a way in. When a civilization shifts into a downswing, the collective immune system is weakened, and these psychic pathogens thrive, possessing traumatized people, causing them to traumatize others in turn. Here's a quote from Alex Jones. "The devil operates through all the possessed people he's got. It's a program." Other models of autonomous psychic evil. The biopsychosocial mapping of Steve and Pauline Richards may be the most accurate model to date on the formation and behavior of autonomous complexes within a Jungian framework. See their Jung to Live By YouTube channel. The Internal Family Systems model, IFS, of Richard Schwartz is a very practical model and system for working with autonomous complexes in life. IFS gives us practices for communicating with and integrating shadow complexes. Schwartz has his own terminology, but it's simple and easy to understand. More on this in the shadow work chapter. Sri Aurobindo spoke of extra-psychic hostile forces. Carlos Castaneda wrote about the astral predator race in the active side of infinity. The Gnostics spoke about archons. There are many other mystical descriptions of the same phenomenon we can dig up, and of course, every pagan and indigenous worldview incorporates evil spirits and demons. Personally, I tend to push back on most modern theories of outside negative entities because this can distract from the psychological work that most people need to do. But within an ancient spiritual context, such as with indigenous healing rituals, this type of understanding is, of course, appropriate. Conclusion. Human beings are much more delicate than we realized. Atomized, mechanized, fast-paced, distracted, throwaway culture is traumatizing to the psyche and our development. Our collective psychic and physical immune systems are becoming more compromised by the day. We are, as a civilization, in fact, possessed by entire ecosystems of psychic pathogens that emerge from the countless ways we traumatize ourselves. When we are traumatized, our inner complexes distort and split, giving rise to demonic versions of our highest potential. Then these possessed complexes pass on their viral codes to society through genetics, culture, and signaling behavior. To the degree we are internally split, our psyches provide fertile soil for the tree of death to drop its seeds to sprout and grow. Just think of the implications of this. If you raise children as a sacred spiritual practice and build societies as sacred vessels for the pure archetypal forms of this universe to manifest on Earth, you create strong and healthy psychosocial immunity. If you become distracted, caught up in ego games, narcissism, or Luciferian grandiosity, you spiritually abandon yourself, your children, and your people. I suspect that this process of degradation, giving rise to infestation of the psyche, is organic. Civilizations rise and fall like every life form. Our task now is to turn our focus towards the psychospiritual, where the wounds are, away from the shiny and flashy matrix, which is now a deadly distraction. Jung and the Jungians have discussed these kinds of things. They talk about how our modern societies have lost social rituals or rites of passage, which were necessary to properly orient the ego towards community and the sacred. They talk about finding God through the sacred self within the individual and about living an ensouled life. They talk about psychospiritual wholeness and individuation, which is the lifelong practice of personal inner development to manifest one's highest purpose. Regardless of the way in which we pursue inner wholeness, those who focus themselves inwardly not only survive, but spiritually thrive because we are not lost. We know who we are, what we are here to do, and we are fulfilled by our mission to evolve ourselves and the species through our personal laboratories of psyche. And we'll end this chapter with a quote by Jung. Modern man does not understand how much his rationalism has put him at the mercy of the psychic underworld. His moral and spiritual tradition has disintegrated, and he is now paying for this breakup in worldwide disorientation and dissociation.